In the soft winter of 1755, Vienna was dressed in quiet snow, white sheets over palaces of marble and gold. Inside the Hofburg Palace, chandeliers glowed over a cradle wrapped in silk. A child was born to the Holy Roman Empress Maria Theresa, a child who would one day wear a crown meant to dazzle the world and shatter under its own weight. They named her Maria Antonia Josepha Johanna, the 15th of 16 children, a princess of Austria, born into music, politics, and destiny. From her earliest days, she was surrounded by ceremony. Courtiers bowed to her tiny form, tutors drilled her in languages she barely understood, and music filled the halls. But where her brothers and sisters carried the heaviness of imperial purpose, Antonia, as her mother called her, carried something else: lightness. She loved laughter, song, and the feeling of spring air through open palace windows. Her mother, the formidable Empress Maria Theresa, was Europe's most powerful woman, ruling with a mind sharp as a sword. She looked at her daughter's carefree smile and sighed. "Antonia," she would say, "you were born to be seen. Learn to be silent." As the years passed, the young Archduchess was shaped not only by music and dance, but by politics. Austria, though grand, was surrounded by enemies, Prussia, Britain, and France among them. To keep the balance of power, the Empress sought alliances through marriage. And in 1768, when Antonia was barely 12, destiny arrived sealed in wax and gold, a letter from Versailles. The Bourbon king, Louis XV of France, proposed a union. His grandson, the shy Louis Auguste, Dauphin of France, would marry an Austrian archduchess. The Empress smiled. "Then it shall be Antonia." Antonia's laughter faded. France, the land of perfume, politics, and secrets. A world of intrigue she barely knew. The making of a Dauphine. At 14, Antonia's transformation began. Tutors corrected her accent, hairdressers changed her style, and painters captured her smile for French eyes. She became Marie Antoinette, the name she would carry into legend. The journey to France was like crossing from childhood into history. On May 14, 1770, she reached the River Rhine, where Austria ended and France began. There, in a gilded pavilion built for the occasion, the ritual of the exchange took place. She stepped into a room filled with officials, stripped of every Austrian possession, her dress, her jewelry, even her beloved dog. When she emerged, she wore French silk, her hair styled à la mode de Versailles. The ceremony was brutal in its symbolism. She no longer belonged to Austria. She now belonged to France. When she crossed the bridge to the French side, a soft rain began to fall, as if heaven itself understood what she had just left behind. The wedding of Versailles. Versailles welcomed her with gold and suspicion. The palace, a shimmering labyrinth of mirrors and whispers, waited for its new princess. The wedding took place in the Royal Chapel of Versailles on May 16, 1770. Thousands gathered. The orchestra thundered. The Dauphin stood beside her, awkward, blushing, and silent. Louis Auguste was gentle, but painfully shy. He loved locks and keys more than laughter, and hunting more than conversation. The people expected passion, the court expected heirs. What they saw instead was uncertainty wrapped in gold. Still, the people cheered. Paris lit bonfires. Fireworks filled the sky. But fate has a cruel sense of irony. During those celebrations, one of the firework carts exploded, killing and injuring hundreds in the crowd. The omen went unnoticed by the cheering courtiers. But whispers spread, a blood at the wedding of France's new queen. Versailles, the Golden Prison. Life at Versailles was a theatre where every glance, every gesture, was judged. Marie was barely 15, and already every morning began with ceremony. Ladies of the court dressed her as if performing a ritual, while noblewomen fought for the honor of handing her gloves or water. She smiled through it all, but inside she was lost. Her husband, now Louis XVI, avoided her out of nervousness. The court mocked her accent, her youth, her inexperience. And so, Marie escaped into what she could control, fashion and pleasure. She turned the palace into a stage of beauty, towering hairstyles, shimmering gowns, lavish balls. Her laughter echoed through the gilded halls, and Paris adored her, at first. To the people, she was l'Autrichienne, the Austrian woman. But to the courtiers, she was a novelty, young, radiant, untamed. She found comfort in friendship, especially with Madame de Polignac, a woman whose charm matched her own. Together they built a circle of luxury, gardens, masques, and midnight music. Yet even as Marie smiled beneath chandeliers, her enemies whispered in the shadows. Too Austrian, said some. Too extravagant, said others. Too powerful, said. A crown for a girl. In 1774, when King Louis XV died of smallpox, the crown of France passed to his grandson, Louis XVI, just 20 years old. And beside him stood Marie Antoinette, only 19, suddenly queen of the greatest kingdom in Europe. As the bells of Notre Dame rang, she looked out over Paris. The cheers were deafening. Flowers rained from balconies. But somewhere deep in that noise, she heard something else, a faint murmur, almost like a warning. As she spends too much, she knows too little, she is not one of us. For now, it didn't matter. She was young, adored, and free to build her world. The girl who once laughed in Vienna's gardens was now the Queen of France. Her face was on coins, her name on every tongue, her gowns imitated by every lady in Paris, but beneath the gold and glory, cracks had already begun to form. The French treasury was collapsing. The people were starving, and Versailles kept dancing. Marie Antoinette, the Austrian Swan, had entered the sky. But every ascent casts a shadow, and hers was just beginning to fall. The year was 1774. France had a new king and queen, both young, both untested, and both bound by a crown far heavier than they understood. The palace of Versailles, glowing in the morning sun, became Marie Antoinette's new universe. Its mirrors reflected her youth, its corridors carried her laughter, and its walls whispered about her every move. To the world outside, she was the living symbol of elegance, a queen who seemed to float rather than walk. But to the courtiers who surrounded her, she was an outsider, Austrian blood wearing French jewels. Even her own husband, Louis XVI, was awkward around her. Theirs was a marriage of politics, not passion. Louis was kind, yes, but shy, reclusive, and more interested in lockmaking and hunting than his radiant young wife. Night after night, their chambers stayed silent. The court began to gossip. The marriage is unconsummated. In Versailles, gossip was poison, and Marie was already beginning to drink from that cup. A queen without a throne. Marie Antoinette tried to hide her loneliness beneath laughter. She organized masquerade balls that lasted until dawn, redesigned her apartments with soft pastel silks, and filled her world with music, roses, and ribbons. Her style set fire to Paris. Every dress she wore became a trend. Every new hairstyle, taller, whiter, more dramatic, became the talk of Europe. Painters adored her, poets compared her to Venus. She was the queen of beauty, the idol of the court. But for all her glittering charm, Marie Antoinette was adrift. France expected her to produce an heir, and years passed without one. Her mother, Empress Maria Theresa, wrote from Vienna, "A queen who cannot bear children is a queen without a throne." Letters from home grew colder. Louis grew distant. And the courtiers, sensing weakness, sharpened their smiles into daggers. The game of appearances. Versailles was a cage made of etiquette and envy. Every morning, Marie awoke to the ritual of Il Livre, the royal rising, where dozens of noble women crowded her room to watch her dress. To outsiders, it seemed majestic. To Marie, it was suffocating. She began to seek freedom in her own way. She built a small world apart from Versailles, a private paradise called Le Petit Trianon. There, she could escape the endless eyes. She dressed simply, tended gardens, and played at shepherdess among white roses and tame lambs. In that peaceful retreat, she laughed again. She sang with her ladies-in-waiting, especially Madame de Polignac, her closest friend. But word of her private estate spread through Paris like wildfire. They called it the Queen's Playground. Pamphlets accused her of ignoring the starving poor while she played at being a peasant in silk. Marie never meant to insult them. She only wanted to feel alive. But perception in France had begun to shift, and the Queen was becoming its villain. The Queen of Fashion. By 1778, Marie Antoinette finally gave birth to a daughter, Marie-Therese, and the kingdom rejoiced. 4 years later, she bore a son, the long-awaited Dauphin. For a moment, she was adored again. The people cheered. Pamphlets praised her beauty, her grace, her motherhood. And with that brief wave of affection, she let herself drift once more into extravagance. She ordered new gowns from Rose Batin, the most famous fashion designer of France. Feathers, diamonds, pearls, everything became larger, grander, more dazzling. The Queen's portraits showed her wrapped in clouds of silk and light. To Marie, fashion was expression. To the people, it became accusation. In the taverns of Paris, they whispered, "She spends while we starve. She builds gardens while we bury our children." A new phrase began to echo in pamphlets, one that history would twist into infamy. "Let them eat cake." Though she never spoke those words, they clung to her name like a curse. The Court of Masks. Meanwhile, France's treasury bled. Years of war had drained its gold, and the lavish court consumed what little remained. Louis XVI, earnest but indecisive, tried to reform taxes. The nobles refused. The clergy resisted. And all the while, Versailles continued its endless dance. At night, masquerade balls lit the hall of mirrors with 1,000 candles. Marie Antoinette would glide through the crowd in jeweled masks, her laughter echoing beneath painted ceilings. But even in disguise, everyone knew who she was. They called her a Madame Deficit. The title cut deeper than any knife. The Diamond Necklace Affair. In 1785, scandal struck like lightning. A massive diamond necklace, worth more than most of France's treasury, became the center of a deception that would destroy the Queen's reputation. A schemer named Jean de la Motte forged letters in Marie Antoinette's name, tricking Cardinal de Rohan into buying the necklace for the Queen. When the plot was exposed, the necklace vanished, and all eyes turned to Marie. She had nothing to do with it. But the court, the people, and the papers refused to believe her. Pamphlets flooded Paris, mocking, scandalous, cruel. Cartoons showed her draped in jewels while peasants starved. Her name became a symbol of corruption. Louis tried to defend her, but the damage was done. France's anger had found its face. The mother and the monarch. Behind the walls of Versailles, Marie's world shrank. She devoted herself to her children, teaching them kindness, hope, and restraint. Her daughter wrote years later, "She taught us to forgive those who wronged us." But forgiveness could not mend a broken crown. The Queen who had once ruled hearts now ruled rumors. Even her laughter, once seen as joy, became proof of arrogance. And yet, as the years turned, she still carried herself with grace. The same grace that had enchanted Vienna now tried to hold back a revolution. She would walk through the gardens of Versailles at sunset, her gown brushing over the marble paths, the golden leaves whispering around her. Perhaps she thought of home, of the open Austrian skies she had left behind. Perhaps she felt the walls closing in. The whispers had become voices. The voices had become cries. And soon, those cries would become the roar of the French Revolution. The year was 1789, a summer heavy with heat and hunger. In Paris, bread had become more expensive than gold. Children cried in the streets. Smoke rose from bakeries and broken shops. And in the distance, the marble palace of Versailles gleamed, silent, unreachable, like a ghost of a world that refused to die. Inside, Marie Antoinette stood before a mirror. She saw her reflection, pale, composed, wrapped in silk, yet behind her eyes flickered a quiet fear. The whispers had grown louder. The people no longer bowed when they spoke her name. They spat. In her heart, she still believed that love for the crown could be restored. But France had changed. The age of kings was ending, and she, the Austrian queen, had become its symbol of excess. The fire ignites. On July 14th, the people of Paris stormed the Bastille. The air thundered with gunfire, The cobblestones ran red, and for the first time, the monarchy trembled. When the news reached Versailles, the court froze. Ministers panicked, nobles fled, and Louis XVI stood stunned, whispering, "Is it a revolt?" "No, Your Majesty," it came the reply, "it is a revolution." Marie Antoinette did not weep. She lifted her chin, her voice calm as she told the trembling courtiers, "Courage! The crown of France must not fall without honor." But courage could not feed the people. Rumors spread that the Queen had ordered soldiers to fire on the hungry, that she hoarded flour in the palace cellars, that she mocked the poor while she danced in silk. Most of it was false, but truth no longer mattered. In the streets, anger had replaced faith. The Women's March. October 5, 1789. Rain poured over Paris like the sky itself was mourning. Thousands of women, bakers' wives, mothers, widows, gathered in fury. They carried knives, sticks, even kitchen tools, and marched the 20 miles to Versailles shouting, "Bread! Bread for our children!" By the time they reached the palace gates, the crowd had swollen into tens of thousands. They were drenched, hungry, desperate, and convinced that the Queen herself was their enemy. Inside, Marie held her son close, the echo of thunder outside mixing with distant cries. Louis hesitated, unsure what to do. By dawn, the mob had broken through. They flooded the palace halls, marble floors slick with rain and blood. One of the guards shouted, "Save the Queen!" Marie was rushed into the king's chambers as rebels stormed her apartments. Her bed was ripped apart. Portraits of her were slashed with knives. Moments later, she stood on the balcony of Versailles. Alone, trembling, yet unbroken. Below her, the sea of faces screamed for her death. But instead of retreating, she bowed. Slowly, gracefully. It was a gesture not of fear, but of defiance, the last act of a queen. For a heartbeat, silence fell. Even the mob, stunned by her composure, lowered their weapons. And then the chant rose. To Paris! To Paris with the king and queen! The royal family was taken from Versailles, their golden cage abandoned forever. The Tuileries prison. In Paris, the Queen lived under guard at the Tuileries Palace. It was a palace in name only. Cold, watched, and haunted by the sound of distant drums, Marie tried to hold her family together. She read to her children by candlelight, wrote secret letters to allies, and prayed for Austria to come to her aid. But France was crumbling faster than rescue could reach. Every night, crowds gathered outside the palace walls, singing songs mocking the Queen. Pamphlets depicted her as a monster. Madame Veto, the Austrian witch, the whore of Babylon. Once, when she looked out from her window, she saw her own image burning in effigy. The crowd cheered as fire devoured her paper likeness. Louis tried to reason with the revolutionaries. He signed decrees, accepted reforms, and promised change. But every promise sounded like a lie to a starving nation. And Marie, still dressed in dignity, became the lightning rod for their rage. the flight and the fall. In June 1791, they tried to escape. It was a desperate plan, a secret journey to the border where loyal troops waited. Under moonlight, the royal family disguised themselves as servants and slipped out of Paris in a heavy carriage. They drove for hours, the wind howling through the fields. Freedom was within reach. But at Varennes, a small town near the frontier, the Queen's beauty betrayed them. A local postmaster recognized her face from a coin, the same calm, noble profile that once inspired love, now bringing doom. The family was captured, dragged back to Paris in silence, surrounded by soldiers, jeered by the crowds. When they passed through the city gates, people shouted, "No more kings! No more queens!" Marie kept her eyes forward, her hands folded on her lap. Only once did she whisper to her daughter, "We must show them how to die." The shadow of death. The following year, the monarchy was officially abolished. Louis XVI was imprisoned, tried, and executed by guillotine in January 1793. When the blade fell, the crowd cheered. But among them, some wept, not for the king, but for the end of something greater. Marie Antoinette, now the widow Capet, was locked in the conciergerie, a stone prison on the Seine. Her cell was damp, her clothes worn, her health fading. Yet even then, she held her head high. Witnesses said she moved with quiet dignity, her voice calm, her posture regal. She no longer asked for mercy, only for her children's safety. Each morning, she heard the drums roll through Paris as more nobles met the blade. At night, she prayed softly to a god she feared had turned away. The last reflection. In October 1793, her trial began. The charges were absurd: treason, theft, corruption, even incest. She denied them all. When the prosecutor accused her of harming her own son, she stood and said, "Nature itself refuses to answer such a charge made against a mother." For a moment, even her accusers fell silent. But the verdict was already written. Guilty. Death. On the morning of October 16th, she dressed in a plain white gown, the color of mourning in France. She refused the help of her guards, saying simply, "I will not give you the satisfaction of seeing fear." As she was led through the streets, thousands gathered to see her fall. Gone was the silk, the diamonds, the crown. But in their place shone something rarer, calm courage. When she climbed the wooden steps, she stumbled once, then apologized to the executioner. "Pardon me, sir. I did not mean to do it." Moments later, the blade fell. The crowd cheered, and silence spread across France. The queen who would not bow. History would call her vain, foolish, extravagant. But those who saw her in her final days remembered something else. A woman who faced the storm with dignity, who carried herself as a queen even when stripped of everything. In the years that followed, her name became legend. A mirror through which the world saw both the beauty and the cruelty of power, and somewhere beyond the echo of drums. Marie Antoinette, the girl who had danced through mirrors and moonlight. became what she was always destined to be. Not just a queen of excess, but the queen of tragedy. The blade had fallen, but France did not grow quieter. The revolution, that furious fire, still raged through the veins of a nation reborn from chaos. Where once there had been music and laughter in Versailles, there was now silence. Halls stripped bare, mirrors gathering dust, gardens wild and overgrown. The queen who had once ruled over that golden world now lay buried in an unmarked grave. Her head separated from her heart. Her name whispered with both hatred and awe. After the guillotine. After her death, the crowd scattered like smoke. Vendors packed up their carts, soldiers marched away, and the executioner cleaned the blade. The same blade that had ended 1,000 years of monarchy in France. In the quiet that followed, a few women wept. One of them, an old flower seller, whispered. She looked like an angel when she died. Her body was thrown into a common grave at the Madeleine Cemetery, lime poured over it to speed decay. No cross, no name, no crown, yet death, as history would prove, could not erase her. Because legends don't die, they linger. The children of shadows. In the conciergerie, Marie had left behind 2 children. Her daughter, Marie-Therese, survived. Her son, Louis-Charles, the little dauphin of France, did not. The boy, barely 8 years old, was taken from his mother, locked in a dark cell, and slowly forgotten by the world. Years later, when his body was found, his ribs counted fewer than his years. Marie's last words to him had been simple. "Be brave, my child. We will meet again in a better world." The silence of Versailles. Versailles became a mausoleum. Its gold no longer gleamed. Its mirrors reflected only ghosts. Tourists came years later to see the place where queens once danced, where laughter echoed across candlelit halls, where perfume once hung heavier than air. But the air now smelled of dust and history. The palace was no longer a home. It was a warning. A reminder that beauty without mercy becomes blindness, and power without love becomes doom. The legacy rewritten. Decades later, after the revolution burned itself out, the monarchy returned, though briefly, and never as before. When King Louis XVIII ascended the throne, he ordered the remains of Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette to be found. Workers dug through the cold soil of the Madeleine Cemetery, uncovering bones wrapped in fragments of white cloth. They were reburied in St. Denis Basilica, among the kings and queens of France. This time, the crowd did not cheer, they wept. The same people who once shouted for her death now stood silent before her tomb. History, in its cruel symmetry, had given her peace. The myth and the mirror. Centuries passed, and Marie Antoinette became more than just a queen. She became a reflection of every age's obsessions. To some, she was the queen of vanity, a symbol of arrogance and waste. To others, she was a martyr of monarchy, a woman devoured by politics, condemned for her youth and beauty. Painters turned her image into art. Poets wrote of her as a fallen angel. filmmakers would one day crown her again. Not with gold, but with sympathy. Because what the world forgot in its fury was that Marie Antoinette was never the monster they imagined. She was a girl who became a queen who became a symbol, and a symbol who became a ghost. The queen in the shadows. In the gardens of Versailles, under the moonlight. There are stories that say her spirit still walks. That on quiet nights, when the fountains sleep and the stars drift low, a soft rustle of silk can be heard moving through the hall of mirrors. A faint perfume, jasmine and rose, lingers in the air. And some say they have seen her reflection in the glass. Not proud, not vain, but wistful. A woman searching for the life she lost. The love she never truly had, and the forgiveness she was denied. Perhaps, in that reflection, she finally found what all queens search for. Peace without a crown. Echoes through time. Today, her name still divides historians and hearts alike. Was she the villain of a starving nation? Or the victim of a world too cruel to understand her? Perhaps she was both. Marie Antoinette remains the eternal paradox. A face of beauty and ruin. Of laughter and despair. Of youth and death. Her story is the mirror of every empire that forgot to look beyond its gold. And when the world whispers her name, it still carries that same haunting rhythm. The echo of a queen who dared to live, to love, and to die with grace.